Welcome to episode 320 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 18th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Blue Sky at SLU Podcast or on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at LMS_United. On Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, you can find me at School Librarians United and the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Friends, it is now my pleasure to introduce the sponsor of this podcast, Junior Library Guild. What if I told you that there's a collection development service that can save you time and increase circulation rates at the same time? Junior Library Guild does that and more with their team of experienced media library specialists and publishing industry professionals. Every title they recommend is vetted for my readers and organized into categories based on reading level and interest. Ultimately, Junior Library Guild helps my students foster a love of reading. Use the code UNITED15 to receive 15 free books in your first shipment. And now for today's episode, Under Attack, and my conversation with Christine Beachler and Dr. Hoeve. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got two amazing guests, and we're going to introduce them one at a time. Christine Beachler, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Christine, you and I have crossed paths over the years. We're both in Michigan. Actually, all of us are in Michigan. Yes, all of us are in Michigan, which is fantastic. Would you please introduce yourself? Tell us about your library, the grades you serve, some of the programs you offer, and a little bit about your role in our state leadership.
Okay, absolutely. Again, my name's Christine Beachler, and this is my 37th year teaching and education. I know, crazy. I first started teaching accounting and computer classes at the high school in Lowell, and then trying to think, I guess it was about 23 years ago, was finishing out my master's degree at Grand Valley State University in library science. And right at the same time I was getting ready to finish that degree, a job came up in our district. And so I've been a school librarian since then. And it was only a couple of years. I was our elementary school librarian, and then the high school and the middle school media specialists retired, and the district gave me the whole responsibility of all 6 schools at one time. So I'm our only school librarian in Lowell, and I work with kids K-12 and, as I mentioned, 6 school library buildings. And we actually have all different kinds of programs all through. Right now we're celebrating April is School Library Month and just finished up March's Reading Month. So doing all kinds of fun things with our kiddos. And I have library assistants that work in each of my buildings. So my role is a little bit more of a management type of a role. I work with the kids when I'm around and when I see them, but a lot of times I'm working with my paraeducators and trying to train them and keep things moving along. We were really fortunate this past week. We hosted the Michigan Supreme Court at Lowell High School, and it was phenomenal. We had all the Supreme Court justices in our school, and they held a case actually in our Performing Arts Center. And then when they finished mingling with the kids after the case was over, they came down and we hosted them in the library. For the afternoon, they had a meeting with some of the attorneys in the area that met with them. I'm not exactly sure the name of the organization, but we hosted down there and got to speak with all of the Supreme Court. So that was one of the fun programs we just finished up, and that was kind of neat.
So I'm dying to know, was this like a mock case, or they actually conducted business in your school?
They did, yeah. It's actually twice a year. They have this outreach program where they schedule these cases, and they go out so that students can learn about the judicial process. And so they actually, they had the attorneys trying the cases right in front of all of the kids, and then they finished the closing arguments at the end of all of it, and then the students were able to even right then ask questions of the attorneys and of explaining all of the case and everything. And then they went into our common area, and the kids were actually able to mingle with the justices and ask questions, and of the attorneys as well. And as I mentioned, then they came down, and our administration, everybody was down in there. So no, they do this, I guess, twice a year. We're really fortunate because one of the people that does a lot of the scheduling, he actually is from Lowell. So we kind of had a little inside track there. So it was just a really cool program and fun for our library. And then the very next day, we turned around and hosted our Maisel region meeting and had people from all over Kent County. And so that was kind of fun and a lot of new things.
I think it's important to mention, for context, that your current position in our state organization, because you put yourself in a position that you have been able to be incredibly impactful for our state organization.
Well, I hope so. That is the goal and the intent on working and serving on the board. I am currently the president of Michigan Association of School Librarians, and last year I was fortunate to plan the conference that we had in Bay City, which was really wonderful and kind of a very fun opportunity. Working with all of the different aspects of the organization is just really, it's been very, very rewarding. One of the most rewarding experiences in my career, I would actually have to say. It's very, what I find to be the most unique, I guess, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but just such a cool part of this serving in this capacity is being kind of on the other side, So for so long in my career, I went to every single MAME and now Maisel conference, and I didn't know a lot of people. And as you mentioned before in different conversations, we can be a little bit in a silo sometimes. And so I don't always feel like, when I would go to the Maisel conference or the MAME conference, I didn't always think very many people even knew who I was. They didn't really care who I was because, I was just one other person there attending. And I always looked up to all of these people that were presenting and knew a lot of other people. And I always was seeking help from other people from their experiences because, again, I was by myself and didn't really have a lot of people to bounce things off of other than through my region. When being region rep was really a great rewarding experience as well. But anyway, now as president, it's sort of like a whole full circle thing because now these new school librarians are coming up and asking me for my help and my opinion and for me to share my experiences and learning from me. And it's just a really unique opportunity to have that. And I'm a little bit in awe of it still when people really want my, input on their situations.
When you and I started talking, you made it very clear that if we were going to do this conversation, that you wanted to bring in another person into this episode, into this conversation. And so I'm hoping that we're going to learn about Dr. Sara Hoeve. Would you tell us, Christine, when it became apparent that you wanted to make sure that this conversation involved not only the two of us, but also Dr. Hoeve?
Well, we actually met. I wonder if she even remembers how we met. She and I were on a panel at a bookstore when all of the book banning sorts of things began, maybe 4 to 5 years ago. And so she and I have known each other and leaned on each other quite a bit, actually, over the last 4 to 5 years. And so we were sitting on this panel, and many people, people from the media were asking us questions, parents were asking us questions, and I was listening to her responses, and I was like, wow, she really understands what's going on, a little bit more than the average person. And so I reached out to her after the event, and I really don't even remember why, if it was just a chat or what, but I know that was a person that I wanted to talk to, and I really wanted to hear more about her experiences and her research that she was doing. And so we've kind of been in touch ever since then, and it's just been a great opportunity for both of us to bounce things off of each other. So as I mentioned, with me being president of Michigan Association of School Librarians, it was kind of funny because she's actually president of her organization as well, and we were both planning conferences at the same time and asking each other for help with those kinds of things and to speak and all of that too. So really interesting.
So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and meet our second guest on the episode today. Dr. Sara Hoeve, please introduce yourself and give us some idea of, your background, your current role, because you're not a school librarian.
Well, thanks for having me, Amy. I grew up in West Michigan in a house where my dad was a fifth grade teacher for over 40 years. And both of my parents were really avid readers. So I spent countless hours in libraries, whether it was school libraries, my community library, my church library. I just grew up loving books and loving to read. After college, I worked as a high school English teacher and then as an instructional coach for about 15 years. And during that time, I earned my master's and my PhD in English education. So then after graduate school, I transitioned into full-time post-secondary education. I started at Purdue University for a while in the English education classes, and then a position opened up closer to home at Hope College, where I currently work in the education department. I direct the student teaching program right now and teach a variety of classes. And I also have started a first-year teacher mentoring program. So when our graduates go into their first year of teaching, we provide mentoring alongside of them, get in the classrooms with them, continue to meet with them, just provide whatever support we can. So I get the opportunity to work with many, many young, passionate, excited education students, new teachers, student teachers. And as Christine mentioned, I'm also currently the president of Michigan Council of Teachers of English.
All right. So I'm feeling very unaccomplished, friends. I have shirked any sort of opportunity to be a leader in any profession whatsoever. I think I just am perfectly happy just sitting at home, pressing record, and talking to people. So we're going to just, you got to go with what you've got. I just want to say before we get started that in the cases where I have talked to people about the experiences that they've had that relate to our profession that have been really negative and painful, I want to be very considerate of our guests and recognize that one of the goals of having this conversation shared with our listeners is because all too often this can be such an alienating experience. It is, and I want to make sure that when people are tuning in to realize that there are many school librarians who have felt targeted in the job that we do every day. And my hope is in sharing and learning how we navigate these experiences. We as a profession become, in the very least, more resilient. But I also feel like when we are targeted because of the job we do every day, I feel like this is one way we can start to begin to see how we have made gains in what we do.
It's a solemn topic, and it isn't something that we're celebrating, and it isn't something that we also want to, you don't want to make somebody out to be, too much of a victim mentality where they're feeling sorry for themselves. But you do, like you mentioned, you do want to show, there are many times where, it's kind of interesting, some of the things that you actually even already said, because I met with the MCLS director today, and as I was walking out, we met for lunch, and as I was walking out of the restaurant, I ran into a woman in our community that I hadn't seen in a while, and she turned and she looked at me and she said, "Well, you are the picture of resilience." And I just am so happy to see you, and you're still standing, and it's amazing what you've been through, the grace that you've shown. And the word grace has been one that has just resonated with me for so long, because one of my colleagues, another Maisel member from a neighboring district, wrote me a note, just a private message on Facebook, and it was a sentence or two, and I'll just never forget it. Because she did talk about that and said, you're, with everything you've been through, that the grace that you've shown is just something for all of us to aspire to. And I was like, wow. You just don't realize, it's very surreal when you're going through some of these things, and you just don't realize how much of a microscope that you're under. And so many people are watching all the time, and not that that's good, and not that that's necessarily bad, but it's just it's the reality of it. You don't, another thing that I will never ever forget. I was listening to George M. Johnson at maybe ALA last year. I think it was ALA. I've been to so many conferences. I believe it was ALA, and of course that's the first book of ours that was ever challenged in the history of our school district. An amazing memoir that he wrote. And when he was speaking, he said, I didn't choose this fight chose me. And I'll never forget those words either, because it's exactly how I feel. I have goosebumps just saying it, but I have thought of those two things so many times, that I still want to, in the face of all of this adversity, I still want to try to show grace and do my very best to keep moving forward and be the person that I know that I am and not let it affect me, because I'm not the same as the person that's doing these things to me or any of the people that are doing these things. That's not me. And so I want to rise above all of that. But also, I didn't choose this. I just didn't choose it. It chose me. And it's really unfortunate. But, here we are.
Well, I just was going to chime in that I hope to accomplish with my part here is that I can shine some light on what we can learn from Christine's situation too. Like, that's really been my goal, is like, how can I help better prepare future teachers and, future librarians and administrators, because they're so unprepared and when these situations hit. So what are the takeaways? What works? What doesn't work in these situations to kind of counter? And also I think there will be people that can relate, and have had that's powerful, just giving Christine a voice in this and a platform to.
Well, and I always love celebrating school librarians. And so I think that whenever we do an episode, which is addressing a very painful chapter in any school librarian's career and professional journey. And so I'm very grateful that both of you have joined us today, because the hope is that in providing this platform to air these experiences and what has happened, we're also going to give our listeners the best chance of putting into context the things that might happen to them as professionals and how to navigate this, this experience. Because when it does happen, it can feel awfully alienating and you feel so personally attacked, because you are being personally attacked. Let's go ahead and perhaps right now, if you could give us, Christine, just a little bit of a timeline. This experience happened more than a few years ago. Is that correct?
Well, it's been ongoing, actually. It started 4.5 to 5 years ago is when really it all began. And so, it's really been ongoing ever since. And, of course, it's evolved and has, started out with just questions about books and about our policies and our procedures. And, I actually got it a little bit from all sides, because there have been schools in our area that handled things very differently. And another thing to understand is that I've actually been in my district longer than any of my administrators. So when this started, it actually started with the Dr. Seuss books that were very widely being challenged and removed from shelves because of the potential for, people being offended by some of the racist types of comments, and not necessarily comments, but panels, whatever, in some of those books. And I, again, we never... we're a small town. We've never really had any problems. I've had comments and questions over the years about books. The Harry Potters were a big thing, and, but we've handled everything all through the years and really haven't had any major problems per se. And we've always had our policies in place like, we were expected to do. When some of those, I wouldn't say that the books were challenges, but the questions and the comments started coming about the Dr. Seuss books. What are you going to do? I had a few comments that were, can we just make this go away? And, I was like, well, that's not the way that the policy works. You need to understand that you don't just remove a book because it offends somebody. And so I looked at what KDL was doing, which is our public library system, and I thought it seemed very reasonable. They basically said, we understand that these books may offend some people, but we have other books that offend people too. And once the books are ready to be weeded and they're not being used anymore, they can be weeded out. And until then, they're going to remain on our shelves. And sorry if it offends somebody, but we have other books that offend people as well. When the question started coming about the Dr. Seuss books, that's exactly how I reacted. And this is, again, the first time something like this had happened. So, we had then pretty much right after that, we started having other book complaints. And, it was really kind of focused on the books at that point and reading excerpts at board meetings, that sort of thing. And it really just kind of went off the rails at that point. I mean, it started out again as the books and all that. And I had a parent meeting, and invited any parent to come in that had questions, explained all of our policies and followed all of our policies, had to basically educate our administrators on this is what, we need to do. We need to follow the board policy. We also need to follow the library policies. And we did that. And, when the people that were complaining didn't get the results that they wanted from their reading excerpts and complaining, that's when the attack started becoming personal on me, and using my name, using my photograph, using my title. And again, I'm the only school librarian we have. So when somebody says our school librarian is a pedophile, we know who they're talking about, right? And so I remember the very first time that something was said about me and that was like that. And I remember a man I didn't know saying something about my heart being pure evil and some other name that he called me. I can't remember that part of it, but I remember just sitting in my living room and sobbing, and I called my superintendent and I was like, can you believe what this man said about me? I said, do you even know him? And I can't remember if he knew him or not, but I remember my superintendent calling him the next day and talking about him and saying, like, you don't understand. You just don't say things like that about a person. This is a good educator that has dedicated her entire career to kids, and because you disagree on the inclusion of a book in our library, you don't call somebody that. You need to think about what you're saying. And so, that's kind of how it started, and it really never has stopped. It's just really never stopped. And it's been very, very personal. And I don't really even understand why, to be honest. I mean, I'm not the only person that makes decisions about what books are included in the library. We use professional reviews. We use all kinds of the award-winning lists, and we get input from teachers and other librarians and students. And, we take all kinds of requests and do our best to have a balanced collection that is inclusive of every one of our students and student groups and student demographics, and just do our best to have a well-balanced collection that is appropriately challenging also. And I'm speaking of the high school right now because that's where the focus of the majority of our complaints have been. But I have immature 9th graders in that school building, and I have very mature 12th graders in that building, and trying to explain to these same people that don't seem to understand, the people complaining about their First Amendment rights and their rights as parents don't seem to understand that students have First Amendment rights as well. And our students deserve to have challenging and, anything. You look at the age levels, the maturity levels, the interest levels, all of those different things that our kids deserve to have in their library collection that are appropriately challenging for every single student. And, when you've got a range from 13-year-olds to 19-year-olds in a building, you can't have all of the books at the maturity level of a 13-year-old. That doesn't even make any sense. I have students right now that are coming in to check out books at this time of the year that will be on college campuses in a month, and all on their own, and they're 18 and 19 years old. And so parents need to understand that they're not the only perspective. Well, their perspective is the most important for their own children, of course. They know their children better than anybody. And we all school librarians that I know are very respectful of parent rights and understand and do not only respect it, we believe it too. We wholeheartedly believe that parents should have the most say in what their children are doing because they know them the best. But that doesn't mean that they have the right or the ability or the knowledge to do that for everybody else's children as well. And also to completely ignore the fact that these students have First Amendment rights. And court case after court case keeps saying that. So, it's just really, it's too bad that it has turned into something that's personal, because in my mind, looking at it from the perspective of a parent that might be upset. I mean, my children went to the same school. I mean, my children went to that school too, and I didn't agree with every single thing that happened in my kids' classrooms and sports teams and so forth. But there's a part of a reasonable person that understands that they're not the only person that is being served or only opinion that is being evaluated to, keep into perspective. And I think most reasonable people understand that when you attend a public school, you don't get to say in every single thing of every part of that school. So some people, it feels like they've lost that perspective a little bit. And I'm not sure why they've made this personal, because it's not personal. Like, I've never even had a conversation with this person. The main one that it has been attacking me, I've never even talked to. I don't even know that person personally at all. Yet they claim to know that I'm a pedophile or a groomer or a smut peddler or whatever it is that, somebody happens to call me. And they don't even know me personally. I mean, I didn't even let my kids watch R-rated movies in high school. So I find it a little bit, hypocritical and ironic that's what I'm being called. My kids sort of laugh about it and say, Mom, they don't know you, do they? I'm like, no, they don't. Yeah, they claim to. They think they do. They think they do because they think I'm seeking out. In fact, one person, even toward the beginning also, said, it seems that our high school librarian or something along that effect has an agenda to fill our library with LGBTQ materials. Do you remember that one, Sarah? Do you remember that comment? So they literally said I had an agenda to fill our school library. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because I didn't know about that agenda that I had. So, but yeah, it's, back to your question, it has evolved into very, very personal attacks and, a lot of misinformation and a lot of, quite frankly, I would say intentional manipulation and, intentionally trying to make me look like somebody that I am not, and doing it in a very manipulative and misleading way. For example, taking a video of me and saying that I refuse to answer any questions. Well, that's not true. I tried answering the question, but yet it's constantly, people saying, well, why wouldn't you answer? Why wouldn't she just answer the question? Well, I tried to answer the question. I asked 4 times, but the video is set in a way that it makes me look bad intentionally. Then also to say, that I'm giving pornography to children, even though people know we have no pornography. We've told them literally 1,000 times we have no pornography in any of our libraries. That would be illegal to do so. Yet they're being told that often, that I'm giving children pornography. And so because people have been told that, then I have received death threats, and I have also received threats of harm.
Other question. So, you're in the buildings, you oversee multiple libraries, but Christine, are your students aware of the hostility being waged against you? Because sometimes, students, they're very savvy, but they can also be oblivious. Is this happening are they aware of these attacks on you? Is your staff aware of these attacks on you?
The staff has been aware from the very beginning. And so every single time something new would happen, I would go to any school that I happened to be at, really over the whole next week, where, some blow up would happen. A third of the staff would come in, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I can't believe you're going through this. And just often a lot of comments and a lot of support, and just shock that somebody would say something so mean about me and lie about me like that and say unkind and untrue things. So I knew always that the staff was very aware of what was going on. And, there are a few staff members that are not supportive of me. They're supportive of the attacks. But again, they've never asked me questions. They've never come to me and said, hey, could you explain our policies? So I find that a little bit disheartening and really unfortunate that there are any people that actually believe the misinformation that's being spread about me, especially about me personally. If somebody doesn't like a book, I respect that. That's fine. Then restrict it from your children's access. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. And as I mentioned, I never even let my kids watch R-rated movies. Never. But yet, I remember my daughter in 5th grade coming home and having watched an R-rated movie at a friend's house. And I was shocked, like, oh my gosh, that somebody would let her watch a movie at that age, with that rating on it. But everybody's different. And I didn't make a big deal out of it. We had a conversation about it. It's called being a parent. And it's called, taking taking those opportunities to talk to your kids about things that they may see that you don't really want them to see, or they may be exposed to that you weren't ready for them to be exposed to. And that's okay. It's going to happen. I mean, those are things that you deal with as a parent, and you take that opportunity for a teachable moment, And so now as far as the kids go, I've never once talked to any students about any of this. That has just not been something I feel like it would be very unprofessional for me to do. But I can tell you over the past couple of years, there have been probably 5 kids that have spoken at board meetings very eloquently, I might add, particularly some of our AP Lit and Lang kids that are, really, really good students and understand literature. And again, we've got some, brilliant kids that are moving along and going to be heading to college immediately. And they're in college courses now. We have kids right now that are dually enrolled in college courses at the same time they're enrolled in classes at Lowell High School. So I did know that there were students that knew about what was going on, but not from me. But of course, there's a lot on social media. There have been quite a few things in our local media as well. And so our kids, I've always said this though, since I started teaching, kids are smarter than people give them credit for, and they know a lot about what's going on. So I'm not surprised to know that they were aware of what was happening, but it did not ever come from me. I would not do that. But I have to tell you of all the things that have happened throughout all of this, to back up just a minute, there's always a silver lining. And one thing that has helped me to go through all of this and to, keep my mental capacity intact was to remember the good things. And so, I didn't choose this fight. I didn't want it, but it's here. And so, there have been a few awards from Maisel that have come my way from KDL, and some leadership opportunities like the one that we already talked about with me being president. And maybe some of those things wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been put in the spotlight throughout some of these. So, I try to look at some of the positive things and try to figure out why me, why is this happening to me? Because there are some days that I just want to wallow in self-pity and feel really, really bad for myself because I cry a lot. But the most amazing thing happened in the fall of this year. I was in my office, and I was on the phone with one of my principals about a parent that was complaining about a book, something different and unrelated. The parent was very respectful, not a big deal, but something that I was dealing with. And a group of students, they were waiting outside my office to come in, waiting for me to get off the phone. And when I got off the phone, they all came in and they said, "Mrs. Beachler, we have something to ask you." And I was like, oh dear, homecoming's coming up. I bet they want me to be in the dunk tank, So all these things going through my mind. And I looked up and I said, "Okay, what is it?" And they said, "We would like you to be the grand marshal of our parade and our homecoming parade." And I just started sobbing. And it was at that point when I knew that so many of these kids really knew what was going on, way more than I knew they knew, but I didn't really realize they had that big of a picture of everything. They said, "You've been standing up for our rights all these years, and we want you to know how much we appreciate it." And I couldn't even talk. I was sobbing so hard. And that was just a really cool, amazing thing for these amazing kids. And for them to do that was just really neat and a really cool experience for me.
Wow. Earning fame the hard way, but you're not alone in this. You have an ally and I want to bring in Dr. Hoeve because I have met school librarians who have experienced attacks on their character and on themselves, but never have I ever heard of any of them teaming up with another person to look at this experience in a way that you've brought in Dr. Hoeve, an academic, and I want to know how this partnership started. I know plenty of school librarians who have been excoriated for the collections they've built and they house in their libraries, but I've never met another school librarian who has partnered with a researcher to parse out and document what is actually happening in real time. So, Dr. Hoeve, how did this happen?
At the time we met, when we were asked to be on a panel together on the topic, I had just finished a broad research study on how pressure from localized parental rights groups were impacting the book selections of teachers in 6 local school districts in my area. All of the groups had similar claims that indoctrination and sexualization of children was occurring through critical race theory, which was a label that was given to any discussion of race at all. Safe space stickers, and mostly pornographic books, they claimed. And most often those books that were pornographic were ones that had queer characters or themes. Almost always. That's what they meant by pornographic. So the study was very broad, and I was able to draw some conclusions and share those out and kind of recognize patterns and strategies going on with these groups, and also impacts on teachers and the decisions they were making and the moral injury that it was causing to them. But I recognized that there wasn't clear best practices for school leaders or teachers on how to respond, react, or counter these campaigns. So when I met Christine, I was really interested in doing kind of a deeper dive into one school district. And so I've been working on writing a singular case study where I just look at how the introduction of this new parental rights group, how it impacted their school community. And I also then looked at the effectiveness of the actions taken by the school leaders, the decisions they made, the ways they responded, and to what extent those decisions and responses were effective or not. I looked at kind of how it impacted the community, how it divided the community, how it, caused moral injury to Christine and to other educators that were specifically targeted. But my goal of the study was to really understand how educators, especially school leadership, can better prepare for and respond to these very organized campaigns, because groups like Moms for Liberty and Liberty Leaders have workshops and trainings and resources so that the people that are involved in advocacy in the local parental rights groups are well trained. They're ready to go. And I don't feel like our school leaders, despite the continuing education they have and the degrees they have, they don't have the same tools. They don't have the same readiness or best practices with how to prepare for these conflicts that are very localized in their communities. So that was really my goal and my interest in looking at Christine's situation. And then over time, we've just had a great partnership in trying to kind of deconstruct, why is this happening? What's behind it? What could we do, to support Christine? The different avenues we've tried to get some of the attacks to stop or to have some recourse to defend her. Just really having somebody to discuss, you have to debrief a lot. It's heavy. The situation is very heavy. And when you read all these things online that people are saying, it's really heavy to read through. And so having somebody to just kind of talk through it with has been a huge support for both her, I think, and myself. It's even getting into the research of it can be really uncomfortable.
What I find interesting is that when people attack educators, and I'm just going to use in air quotes, in the olden days, this would have been a phone call. And if you were lucky, you might have transcribed some of the words that were uttered to you. But increasingly now, these attacks are coming in the form of emails, which are easy to save and share, and also in the form of social media posts. And the remarkable thing is that there was a time when I was an educator where if somebody had stern words with you, you were in shock. It was a conversation. There was very little way that I could have recaptured that experience and shared it with anybody else with any sort of clarity and devoid of emotion. But when these attacks come to Christine and other school librarians, because they're in print and they are easily shared with an academic, with an administrator, it is remarkable because as painful as these messages are, the fact that Christine has been able to share what she has experienced with you and a supervisor, it really does serve as these proof points. You can see what exactly has been going on, and these attacks are available. We can share them with your administrator, Christine, with your board, and with a researcher who is learning more about these organizations and these very personal attacks on the school librarians that they see as being detrimental to their students' growth.
And I also have not just been, I've spent a lot of time with Christine and asking her questions and interviewing her, but I've also spent time interviewing a number of the board members. I've interviewed a number of administrators, community members, as well as, digging through a lot of documentation as well. So I've really tried to get as much as possible a whole picture of the community conflict, because the community that the school district is set in is a very, very tight-knit community. And they have just a few social media pages that are very unique to this community that everybody on the community kind of stays on. And so that's been used as a really effective tool against Christine, these social media pages where people write things that are inaccurate, spread misinformation very quickly, say things very publicly, and then a whole bunch of other people who don't know Christine jump on and make comments, and it can snowball so quickly. So using that, social media to spread disinformation has been a huge weapon that the school district has had to come up with ways to counter, because it spreads through this community so quickly. And so my goal has just been to get kind of a better understanding of kind of how this conflict has impacted Christine, but also the larger community.
Dr. Hoeve, I don't know if this is a question that you can answer at this time, but do you feel there is a better way for school districts to respond when this onslaught begins? Because it escalates like wildfire, but is there something that school districts should be doing to in some way mediate or, curtail some of these attacks? This is not new. We're years into this, and it is a relatively new phenomenon. So in your research and learning about these, very targeted attacks on specific individuals, have you found that there are ways that are better to respond? Is no response better? I mean, I don't know.
Absolutely. So the first thing administrators should know is just the way to frame these conflicts. Because these are localized conflicts, they seem like grassroots, just parents with some concerns against the school district, but they're not that. This is a highly organized campaign that uses very specific strategies and is part of a broader white Christian nationalist agenda. The rhetoric across the country in so many hundreds of different campaigns like this is the same. The strategies, the school board meetings is the same. This is not a good faith effort. I totally agree with you, Amy, what you said back in the day. When I was teaching high school, if a parent was upset about a book, they came in and we talked about it. We went into those conversations that they were good faith conversations, that we both wanted to resolve this situation. And in these conflicts, particularly the one against Christine, I don't think everybody is coming to it in good faith. I don't think that the leaders necessarily want the resolution or don't want a resolution that's not their resolution. I'm pretty sure that if the book issue was solved, there would be a new issue, because it's broader goals than that. It's about really undermining public education. It's about maintaining white Christian nationalism. It's about homophobia. It's about, racial concerns. It's tied to school privatization. They're bigger issues. And so understanding, first of all, that this is not about the books. The books is what we have, the vehicle they have chosen. They're manufactured conflicts that don't really exist. So anthropologist Mica Pollock coined the term conflict campaigns, which she uses to describe the efforts that emerge at these district levels, but have patterns and broader connections to larger movements. And so in these localized campaigns, they're creating this conflict using the exact same language, tactics, rhetoric, logic of this greater parental rights movement. A lot of times they'll use the same book list. So the list of books they're upset about aren't even in your library most of the time because they're just passing around the same list, or they're reading the same excerpts at every school district because that's the directive that was given.
And Amy, this is kind of funny because this is exactly how we met. Because when we were at this panel, she was saying exactly those kinds of things. And I started to realize when I went to the Maisel Summer Institute that the first 2 books that were read, the excerpts were read in our library. Oh my gosh, they were read the same book at that one, the same book at that one. So when all of us librarians got together in the summer, it was a completely orchestrated campaign that went out. I mean, even the same books were being read. Like, okay, everybody, go read this book. Then next month, we're going to go read this book. And until I heard Sara, sorry, I always call her Sara.
You can call me Sara. That doesn't bother me at all. Feel free to use Sara.
When I heard her speaking on that panel, I was like, oh my gosh, she gets it. Because I've always known this is not about the books. I mean, because the reason that I knew it was not about the books was because I already answered all of those questions, and you asked what things could we do? Well, I made an FAQ I put on our website immediately that answered every single question. And it was, again, a manufactured problem that just didn't exist. And, I explained all of that to them. And if you don't want this book, then challenge it. And then they weren't challenging any books, right? So, and we wrote a letter to the editor after a couple of years. And so, I mean, we've tried and tried and tried. I held a parent meeting, invited everyone in, and explained everything till I was blue in the face, very, very clearly. And so, again, listening to Dr. Hoeve, I was like, she gets it. This is not about the books. This has never been about the books. It is completely about, in my opinion, from my experiences and what I've seen, about undermining public education.
Again, it is an important conversation to share. I want listeners to hear about your experiences because I feel this is going to connect with people who have on some level experienced some of this in their own spaces and with their own districts. So I'm just very grateful.
I think understanding that, we all understand that parents have concerns about their child's education. There are going to be disagreements between school leaders and parents, and that's normal. But we all expect as educators to come to those conversations in good faith with the parents to try to resolve it. And the first step, I think, is understanding that mindset does not work in this, because the leaders of these localized groups, not all the people that are involved in it, but the leaders are not coming in good faith, I don't believe. I think they have broader goals that are not specifics to the books. And I think if you removed all of these books from the library, they would pivot and there would be a new issue. Because I've seen this group, in Christine's case, complain about everything from free breakfast for kids, to, no bullying program, to just, things that you would think, who would be upset about that? But anything that they can tie in some way to a larger socialist agenda.
So, Dr. Hoeve, I've also heard that oftentimes many of these complaints came from people who originally were angry about the masks during COVID. And this having these parent organizations who were adamant that they not be required. So when sort of COVID was sort of the first time in my lifetime when families were being asked to do things which were so extraordinarily outside the realm of what we have ever come to expect when it comes to sending your kid to school, and mask mandates and vaccinations and social distancing and all of these mandates that were coming down. I mean, the word mandate wasn't on my radar as an educator until the COVID. And it seems like once the mask mandate sort of stopped being that target, now they had to find something else to attach their anger to. Dr. Hoeve, You have made it the focus of your research to study people who have been on the receiving end of some of these attacks. Can you put into context, larger context, the experience that you have seen in your study of these attacks on Christine Beachler?
Yes. So after about 5 to 6 years of researching these parental right groups and conflicts over books across the United States, I think that this targeted campaign against Christine is truly one of the most vicious attacks on one educator and relentless attacks on one educator that I have seen. For at least 4 years, probably longer, there have been social media posts across multiple pages, community pages, private pages that target, that defame Christine, that call her names, that post her picture, that post her full name, that criticize her looks, that say things like she's a danger to children, she justifies porn for kids, she's completely evil, just on and on. These terrible public claims daily almost, and it's just relentless. In addition, they do things like speculate about her family finances or make comments about how she was hired, that her hiring wasn't legitimate, that she tries to get rid of the Bibles in the library, her religious beliefs. There just seems to be no bounds. In private messages, she receives death threats, demands for her resignation. There's been physical confrontations when she was at a family gathering at a park. Somebody tried to confront her about the book conflict. They've tried to go to the prosecutor's office and have her arrested. They've discussed doing a citizen's arrest on her. They've tried to get her fired multiple times. There's pending litigation that sues her specifically, not just the school district, but her as a person. She no longer feels safe going to the grocery stores or church services. She's missed community events. Her kids live in this community, are graduates. Her husband, works in the school district. And so it's extremely painful, not only for her, but for their entire family. And although we have multiple people in the community have made efforts to go to law enforcement, to go to the ACLU, I've spoken to Dr. Rice's office, there seems to be just no protection for educators that are dealing with this. They just all, her union, nobody has a way to stop or shield her from what is happening because she is a public school employee. There seems to be very little protection. And the people who write a lot of the posts are smart enough to evade direct defamation in most cases, but there's little recourse or protection for people in her situation, which is maddening. Although everybody clearly agrees it's wrong and sympathizes with her. Can you imagine sustaining 4 to 5 years of harassment and slander and abuse just for doing your job each day? It's just been unbelievable. Sorry, was that too much? I just want them to understand that this isn't just like a couple mean things people said on social media, but this has been a relentless campaign for years because that's where the trauma comes from. I mean, it's not just a couple people said they didn't, this has been an unbelievable attack against her specifically, which is also what's so bizarre.
Half of my hair has fallen out, actually, and I've broken several of my teeth. I mean, it has gone from, being, the anxiety and, the trauma of it to actually I'm having quite a few physical effects of it now as well.
When I interviewed Martha Hickson, I believe Martha ended up taking medical leave for quite a bit of a year because she had so many physical maladies and things that were manifesting in her overall health, and she was deteriorating because these attacks on her have just become unbearable. Dr. Hoeve, I'm hoping yes is the answer. The findings and the data that you've been able to gather and the studying and a lot of this that has been happening with Christine and other school librarians, is any of this going to find its way into publication soon, I hope?
Yes, I'm trying, but every time I get close, it's like something new happens in the conflict that I just can't not write about. I have presented in a few different national conferences about things I have learned, conclusions I've made. I think I've identified really 4 very effective ways to respond to these type of campaigns. And I think one is exactly what Christine mentioned earlier, and that's countering the misinformation and the spread of disinformation with your own really clear communication strategies. So making sure, first of all, that the first thing that the administrators told me they did in this situation was make sure they understood the policies, made sure that they understood the Miller test, existing law, making sure that they deferred to Christine as the expert, the procedures of the library. And then once they had a strong understanding of that and felt like their board had a strong understanding, then it was, how can we communicate this to our school community? So they did a number of things. Christine held meetings. They had an FAQ page that they could easily point people to that had questions or were upset. They wrote an open letter to the editor on some of those public sites that I talked about, but they also reached out when they heard that people were upset. They reached out and they met with them individually to build those relationships. And that's so important as well, to just sit down and talk to people that are hearing and are starting to feel upset and have concerns. And the second really important thing that school leaders can do is to develop kind of what we call a community of super supporters who can show that support for the school system and be a counter voice to the negative that's out there, and can call out the disinformation, because a lot of our educators working in schools and our board members cannot be on social media engaging in this type of stuff. So the community members can be a voice to say, that's not true, for people who are just innocently reading through social media, so that they're not misled or pulled into that. And those people, those super supporters, can also come and speak at board meetings and email the administrators that they do support, for example, a safe space sticker, or they do support the students' right to read, and they don't want this mom or this dad deciding which books their kid can have access to. So having that counter voice, and that can be hard, because when people are happy with a school, it's hard to get them riled up and involved. But that counter voice is really important as well. And finally, the last one is to really not normalize the racist, homophobic, and abusive rhetoric. It has to be called out and recognized when it's happening. There has to be boundaries put in place to not abuse the teachers. There has to be people that are calling out the racism and homophobia in the social media posts, even if they're veiled. And not normalizing it as, again, this kind of good faith concerns that parents have. But it's rooted in racism and homophobia, and it's often abusive to the teachers. And, I think the school community here has done a lot of great things, but they have struggled with how to protect the educators from that abuse, and how to not normalize the rhetoric that's being used, because not only is their job to protect their educators from that abuse, but if we normalize that racist and homophobic rhetoric, we are telling our most vulnerable students that that's okay. And the school district's job is also to protect those students from that abuse that impacts them as well.
Would you count one of your super supporters as the widely acclaimed Jodi Picoult, who wrote a letter? Was it in the local newspaper? I know I saw it in print, but I forget which newspaper it was. And can we include that in our show notes? Because anytime you get a nationally acclaimed, award-winning author to write a letter on your behalf, you got the attention of Jodi Picoult.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool. She's sort of my claim to fame, right? So actually, I was in the documentary Band Together. And so because I was in that documentary, I was in a couple of Zoom meetings with Jodi and had the opportunity to speak with her in that capacity. And so when one of the most targeted attacks on me occurred, I was devastated. I didn't even go to work. When I started getting the death threats and the threats of harm, I wasn't able to go to work. I just, PTSD, I think. I was texting Dr. Hoeve and some of my other colleagues and friends and trying to figure out, where do I go from here? And Jodi Picoult was one of the people that I reached out to as well. And she was very, very helpful, very supportive, and was able to get me in contact with some other people through, like Pen America. And I'm trying to think of who else she connected me with, but obviously ALA and, just different people that she has in her group of connections that I might not necessarily have the ability to connect with right away. Anyway, so when I reached out to her, I asked her, I said, would you be willing to write me a letter of support? And she said, absolutely. And like an hour later, I already had it. So yeah, I was pretty fortunate.
And you mentioned this documentary. I'm aware of at least 2 other documentaries which have all been focused on the plight of the school librarians who are being just targeted for doing our jobs, and the Librarians documentary especially, and we quite a few publications which have come out. Amanda Jones is That Librarian. It speaks to how school librarians respond. When you look at the books and the documentaries which have all come out of some of these incredibly targeted and horrific attacks on the character of the very librarians who work in our schools, I think it does speak volumes about how this trauma can be publicized in such a way that people can see through what is happening and what the real target is, when you recognize, as Dr. Hoeve says, that so much of this is not about the books at all. I appreciate Dr. Hoeve sharing some of these findings that you have, because I think it's very revealing, and it helps to know, after you have sort of followed Christine in this journey over the years and seen what these groups have revealed about themselves as much as they have in when they've targeted school librarians. Christine, I would love to know, we're wrapping up a school year. I'm hoping that there is room for healing.
Well, back with what Dr. Hoeve said about, one thing that districts have not done very well is to protect our staff from these absolutely crazy accusations. To call me a pedophile, I just don't. It's so flippant. It's like it's no big deal to call somebody a pedophile anymore, and from this specific group of people anyway, or a groomer. And, when you actually look at the definitions of what some of those things are, obviously it's horrific. And, they act like it's okay, or I guess, again, to go back to what Dr. Hoeve said, normalize that behavior as if, these are really pedophiles and they are really looking to, involve our kids in sex acts. And it's just, as a 37-year educator, again, I've invested my entire career into kids. And quite honestly, it's devastating to have somebody make that accusation of anybody, but I can't even wrap my head around it. But that's one thing that I don't think that districts have been able to, school districts anyway, have been able to get a handle on, and how to do that, because we aren't allowed to defend ourselves on social media. And we're in an actually even more difficult situation because we are actually in the middle of pending litigation as well. Last year, the last day of school, we were served with paperwork that we were being sued. And so that has complicated our response as well. And so, we can't really make any changes, improvements. I feel like we're a little bit at a standstill with some of these things, waiting to find out how that litigation is resolved or settled. We've actually filed a motion to dismiss, and, obviously we're hopeful that that's what will happen. But until that's resolved, it makes it a little bit more complicated for us. And so, I'm not really sure. I don't see an end to it right now. I've been hoping, but I've actually seen it get worse, to be honest with you. It's really been a smear campaign to completely demoralize me in, what Dr. Hoeve called the most vicious and targeted attack. And that really sunk in when she said that to me. It just really went right to my heart, because I do wonder, why me? I mean, I don't have any idea why this person is this group of people, really, but it's mainly one person that is just so focused on smearing my name, and I'm really not sure why. No, I don't see an end in sight, and I don't really understand it. Yeah, it's unfortunate because I can't really do a whole lot about it because of the pending litigation.
Yeah. Well, but it sounds like you have the support of Dr. Hoeve to make sure that what is gleaned from these experiences is being in some way analyzed, and I wouldn't necessarily say documented, but it is being evaluated for what it truly represents.
When it started out, I feel like we were called to question quite often. I mean, there were people that were, all of a sudden you're reading this really salacious excerpt from a book and you're like, whoa, that's just terrible. And it was, embarrassing and difficult. And all of a sudden you're, wow, you're under the spotlight. But, over the years, I think people have realized any question they've asked me, I've answered fully. I've answered honestly. And, other people are kind of finding out, well, gosh, that I found out that was said wasn't true. When it started out, I feel like we were called to question quite often. I mean, there were people that were, all of a sudden you're reading this really salacious excerpt from a book and you're like, whoa, that's just terrible. And it was, embarrassing and difficult. And all of a sudden you're, wow, you're under the spotlight. But over the years, I think people have realized any question they've asked me, I've answered fully. I've answered honestly. And, other people are kind of finding out, well, gosh, that I found out that was said wasn't true. And that was said wasn't true. And it's taken some time, but I think over the course of the 5 years that this has gone on, my credibility, I would say, with the vast, vast majority of our community is quite high, because I've never lied to anybody about anything. I've always answered fully. And, there are books that I don't really necessarily think are, they're not books I would choose. They're not maybe books that I think are wonderful. But again, I'm not saying that they're inappropriate but again, everybody has a different opinion. There are movies that I don't like. My husband likes to watch movies where, there's blood and gore. I can't stand that. And so, while I love Stephen King, those aren't my favorite books either. So it's just, we all are different individuals and we all have different tastes and things that we like, and everyone needs to be respectful and understand that, you can't just start pulling books out because it just doesn't end there. So, but again, back to my point, I think that, at the beginning, people were all up in arms, and throughout all of it, I've maintained the same exact message. I haven't lied to anybody ever. Nobody has disproven something that I said to be inaccurate or found out again later that I lied to them. And so I do think that I have a lot of credibility with our community now. And I think that there's still some support for some of this, but I think the vast, vast majority of the people, from what has been communicated to me, understand that there are laws and policies and procedures that guide the way that the library books are curated and kept, and we have to follow them. Whether you like a book or you don't like a book, you just don't take it out. It's just not the way that it works. So it is what it is. But I do think that the tides have turned, per se. What do you think, Dr. Hoeve?
There is a lot of value in, exactly like you said, Amy, documenting. I think that's a great word. This experience that Christine has gone through, and learning from it. The way, that's why researchers research, because we want to learn from people's experience, and we want to learn from the data, and we want to learn from the information so that we can use it in similar situations. And I think in this case, I didn't emphasize it earlier, but in this case, the majority of those strategies have been extremely successful. I would say in Christine's community, 98% of public trust has been restored in the school district by community members, by parents. The majority of negative comments now are outsiders that are affiliated with these broader groups, leaders of similar groups that are coming in. And similarly, on social media, the racism, the homophobia, that is being called out regularly. And it's gotten to the point where the use, I would say, of a lot of the public sites has lessened. And it's most of the posts now are on a private group where it's become kind of like an echo chamber to repeat these claims. So I would say that for the majority, it's been successful. So I think we can learn that. However, I think Christine still is the casualty of that success. I think, and not just Christine, but in other districts too, these teachers and librarians have reported symptoms to me that are common after real highly traumatic events: anxiety, panic, loss of sleep, depression, hopelessness, hair loss. One teacher struggled to even describe the impact. I remember she said, when you put your heart and soul into your job, you go the extra mile every day, you do things that were never asked of you because you love children so much, and they accuse you of something so horrific. She said, I don't even have vocabulary to describe the offense that causes. And so recognizing how deeply painful this is, and how, another teacher I spoke with, she hired a resiliency coach, she hired a trauma therapist just to figure out how to get to school every day because of the trauma she went through. And I think that if school districts fail to address this collective trauma that's happening, this will drive a record-breaking number of educators from the profession. In the last study I did, over half of them were talking about leaving. However, the ones that are staying in, and when they're staying in, like Christine, they are not backing down. They are, if not more committed to defending students' right to read than they were when there wasn't a conflict. They're absolutely committed. I had one teacher tell me, I'm a rule follower. I don't get in trouble, but all of a sudden I'm a badass. I have diverse books in my room. She really just said, I'm going to take this as, my role that I didn't ask for, but my role to make sure that my students are protected, especially my most vulnerable students. And I'm going to be their defender.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's maybe some of the positives that we can see, that there are teachers who, and the cost is astronomical, and that's what's so disturbing about it. But their teachers are not backing down.
Well, I am so grateful. I mean, it is very intrusive of us to press record and ask a bunch of questions and ask you to, in many ways, reach back into your memory and pull those up fresh for us to understand and appreciate so that we can learn from your experiences. And I am very grateful that you have been able to selflessly share of your experience. And I know that there are school librarians who are very grateful because on some level, this is something which if we have not experienced firsthand, we live in fear of. And yet we see your resilience and your grace that continues to shine and will not leave you defeated. Dr. Hoeve, I am grateful that the academics are paying attention, because it gives us one more way to make sure that what happens here is not forgotten and we learn from it, and that at the end of the day, the crime that has been committed is just robbing these dedicated educators of their opportunity to dedicate their full selves to the work that we do every day. We shouldn't have to go to work guarded. We shouldn't have to go to work hiding the upset that has, just been pervasive and hanging over you like a cloud. And so, Christine, I couldn't ask for a more dedicated president of our state organization. I'm very grateful that you have managed to also be a leader throughout all of this and come out of this experience still committed to the work that you do every day. And Dr. Hoeve, thank you very much. Friends, I think you'll understand why we're not sharing social media on this show. However, if any of you are moved to write, either Christine Beachler or Dr. Sara Hoeve, please send them to my email and I will be sure to get those letters to them. Absolutely. Christine, Sara, thank you so much for joining us today. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I wish both of you the peace and strength to go about all the work that you do every day, because it truly is important and meaningful to the people that you support and serve.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Amy.
Friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. I do hope you take a look at the link to Junior Library Guild in our show notes. Use the code UNITED15 and receive 15 free books with your very first shipment. Friends, I am currently juggling several outlines and tentative recording dates thanks to the holidays and to the end of the school year. But you can be sure our upcoming episode will showcase amazing school librarians sharing their strategy and resources. I hope you will tune in.